Well, that was a bit of a mess, wasn't it? Full-time, Flamengo 3, Chelsea 1. Chelsea lose their second game of the Club World Cup out in Philly this evening. Yeah, a really messy, chaotic, frustrating, and at times quite confusing second half. I'm going to say from the off, and as I said pre this tournament, like this level of tournament and kind of it's been entertaining, and I think if you're a neutral, obviously these kind of results are quite entertaining, especially from the South American point of view. Like their influence on this tournament has kind of been the best part about it. Seeing some of the shocks, the level of competition, a type of team or type of players we don't usually watch, or teams and style of football that I think makes you can see why some are excited about the prospect of a Club World Cup. However, like my sort of ranking of importance of kind of stakes and how much I'm ranking it in terms of how I judge seriously a whole season or kind of where it places in the season, I still don't think if Chelsea were, say, knocked out in a couple of days' time, it's going to come nowhere close to what I think about the Premier League and the Champions League. However, I do think there are things within today's game that I just think slightly concern me, or just questions about things that I really hope are just anomalies for this tournament. And I am giving a lot of grace because it is at the end of a very long season, and I'm not entirely shocked that Chelsea are not fit, raring to go, as alert, as physically at their peak as they would be even a couple of months ago, right? Because this is a very new situation. Although we are talking about international players who are used to maybe playing at the end of a long season for their nations at tournaments. However, I think you factor that in as well. However, I don't think we can get away from some of the messy things in this performance that I really do hope are rectified, at least for the final group game and maybe beyond that, and especially heading into next season. So I think, please do give me your thoughts on the game in the comments below. Again, how serious are you taking it? Are there things about it that I'm missing that you really want to pick up on? Let me know down in the comments below. So the lineup, in a lot of ways, was not that surprising, but I think one of the big things that caused problems throughout the game, and I think is, in some ways, again, we can talk, is this a Club World Cup thing? Or is it, a Maresca thing that we've seen before? And I do think in some ways, if we're being fair, it is a Maresca thing we've seen before, of like feeling like, the square pegs kind of in round holes thing that we've seen. And I think it's something that Maresca has got to get beyond in the new season. Partly because we're playing a higher level of competition. And maybe in some ways this was like a representation of, it's not a Conference League situation anymore where you can get away with doing that against some very poor opposition. Especially in the Champions League, you're not going to be able to do that midweek when you're having to rotate. But also just baffling things when you look at the alternative options that Maresca has at his disposal that he didn't have in the final few games of last season. So I think that's something as a coach he really needs to develop, in my opinion, because they just don't seem to make a lot of sense. I don't really understand having Malo Gusto, Reece James and Motka Correa all in the same lineup. For me, there's at least got to be one of those, and for me it was quite obvious the player who probably shouldn't have been starting today, and that was Malo Gusto, who was pretty atrocious really, and continued his bad form that we saw on Monday. You wonder even what Josh Achimpong is thinking watching on from the sidelines, like, can't I get a game? And one other player that we are going to focus on who once again did not feature in this game, because surprisingly there was a lot of chatter pre-game about how there was going to be 3 to 4 changes. Andrey Santos was going to make his competitive debut for Chelsea. Didn't happen, and that's a separate issue. But I can't be surprised that Flamengo gave Chelsea a very challenging game because of the South American teams we've seen so far. Botafogo obviously beating PSG, big shock of the tournament, how close those games have been so far in the tournament. So this is the best Brazilian team, and as well, they are also right at the start of their domestic season, so their calendar is slightly different obviously to ours. So they're at their peak, and I thought Felipe Luis, from a coaching point of view, got it spot on today. I mean, Chelsea were pretty much outplayed from the start, other than the fact that our opening goal comes through Pedro Neto capitalising on a really bad error and finishing well himself. You can't really say this was a Chelsea performance that flipped at like 60 minutes and a moment of madness changed everything. It kind of felt like that, but let's be honest, if you watch the entirety of this game, Chelsea didn't look like in control in the first half. I thought, capitalised in some sense on that error, and also looked physically able to confront and defensively just about manage. But we've seen it so often. You let games drift, you let problems within the team tactically persist, and eventually it catches up with you. And I felt that is the story of this game. Because I think the main issue for me today looking at that team was several things, but I think mainly, let's just go for the most obvious one. Malo Gusto. Just defensively, just his all-round performance, his lack of awareness, him drifting into central areas, which doesn't suit him. It's not going to work. I don't know why we continue to persist with it, him inverting. But even at times, seeing him overlap, whatever it was, positionally, just a really bad game. And it didn't really surprise me that 2 of the 3 Flamengo goals came on his side and came with him losing either his man or losing an aerial battle. You know, it just summed up how far Malo Gusto is away from, I think, the required level at the moment. And it's one of those things that, you know, from a coaching point of view or just a decision-making point of view, I just don't really understand from Enzo Maresca, because he watched Malo Gusto, as we did on Monday, come off the bench and not look that great against LAFC. Not an LAFC that was anywhere close to what Flamengo were providing from an attacking point of view today. Those are those things that I just don't quite marry up, where I'm like, we're playing 2 right backs in this starting 11, which already I'm not the biggest fan of when you have alternative options now that you could use. If you didn't have Dario Sugo, if you didn't have Romeo Lavia, if you didn't have Andrey Santos on the bench, which you didn't for last season, I can sort of understand it, or at least, you know, when Lavia was injured. Now you do have those options. I don't think it makes much sense. It feels like over complicating something that could be quite simple. And I felt the simple things Maresca got very right at the end of last season. But here it felt like overcomplicating things. And what that meant was, further up the pitch, you had Cole Palmer playing a right wing position. Didn't really suit him, because in the way Chelsea were trying to get the ball forward, he very rarely got on the ball in this game. Liam Delap, I thought, had some good moments from a confrontational point of view, but unfortunately Chelsea never really gained that much territory that we got to see Liam Delap maybe as a focal point. You know, it was very hard to kind of judge him in kind of his overall performance, because especially in that second half, Flamengo had more of the ball, they were passing the ball more, they were pressing Chelsea back, and there are a few close calls even before the equaliser from Enrique on the 62nd minute, which really was a mess. I mean, all 3 goals from Flamengo were a real mess from a defensive point of view. We had the one that we got away with barely, thanks to, you know, a Reece James error that goes towards the back post, and somehow the ball doesn't find its way into the back of the net. But the equaliser itself was as messy, really, and it comes from a really dangerous set piece, and Malo Gusto just not being alert. The ball gets played back across the goal, and it's an easy tap, and in the end, you know, it just felt like Chelsea were overwhelmed by the situation. The momentum shift in the game, I am a believer in momentum in football, and it just felt like Chelsea were completely incapable of stemming the tide of Flamengo, especially attacking towards their own fans in that second half. Who were very loud, very vocal, very much getting behind their team, and these are all things that you could have predicted ahead of time. But to concede in those 2 goals, as I say, all 3 goals, I think how bad they were from like just players either losing 50-50s, not positionally being aware enough, losing aerial duels quite easily. It's those things that I just never am going to accept. You know, if you lose out to a team that just constructs a really nice move, an individual moment of quality, I think you just have to throw your hands up and say, fair enough, that's a great goal. I felt it was far too timid, and those are things I never want to see from a Chelsea team. Of course, whilst all of this is going on, we make changes. We bring on Nicolas Jackson, we bring on Romeo Lavia, and of course Jackson, the only thing he does in the game is decide to put his studs up and get himself sent off. I know a lot of the focus will now be on Nicolas Jackson, rightly so, because this is the second time he's done this in a matter of months, really. Of course, he did it away at Newcastle, that could have cost Chelsea pretty much their season. Luckily, it didn't. But he's done it again today in a moment when his team needs a bit of calm. He's brought on, hopefully, to bring an attacking energy and influence that wasn't there from Delap. And he just ruins it. He ruins the game, really, again. And you know, I don't have much sympathy for Jackson. How can you? Because this is not a moment of madness in the heat of the US that we've never seen from this player before. This is something we've seen consistently now. This is a pattern. And it's a reckless challenge. And sure, the officiating in this tournament has been pretty poor to quite absurd. And I thought the official in the first half had very little control of the game. And I was a little bit concerned heading into the second, the fact that several Chelsea players were on a booking. But this has nothing to do with officiating. You don't even touch that. This is a red card on any planet, any galaxy, any game, any video game. It's a red card. That's what it is. And it's all down to Nicolas Jackson showing once again an immaturity, a level of selfishness, unfortunately, that he does not need to have in his game. And it's so frustrating for a guy like myself who has defended Jackson. We've been talking recently about him playing left wing. You know, this rips all of that up. You know, as a fan, I can have no comeback to people who just either kind of done with the player or just, you know, will have a lot of fury and criticism of that guy for being selfish, for taking the game away from Chelsea effectively. A game that was already kind of going away from Chelsea, let's be honest about it. And yeah, from there, the game was effectively done. And then the third goal, really poor defensively. Again, it's a few poor touches, but somehow Flamengo still were able to get it through to a position where Jan can score a goal. You have a couple of subs also scoring off the bench, which is never a great sign. And Chelsea didn't really have any response. And that was kind of the way the game played for a long period of time. Other than Neto and Delap having a few good moments in the first half, I thought Caicedo had to clear up a lot of the mess that was around him for the majority of that game. That's nothing new. And now we go into a third game that is now a must-win. And I think the big talking point, and I'm sorry it's taken so long to get to this point, but I think the big question on most people's minds, on lips, and probably should be asked to Maresca directly, where the hell is Andrey Santos? Andrey Santos is listed on the bench. He's been listed on the bench for the first two games. For a guy that I think most of us were really excited to see feature and finally get into the Chelsea team in a serious way, that the club have kind of been making it clear, or at least, you know, reports coming through that no, he's not for sale. You know, he's clearly part of the plans. I cannot dismiss people's concerns after the first two games. How can you? He's played literally no part. Dario Sugo has even got more minutes than him. Mark Hughes got more minutes than him. Christopher Nkunku has got more minutes than Andrey Santos. So probably a sentence a few weeks ago, you wouldn't have probably predicted. It is things like this that I just find it hard, unless you can talk about how, you know, adapting to life at Chelsea. Maybe it's, you know, the fact that he's relying on older players in the team. But that doesn't really. The thing that undermines that instantly is obviously Liam Delap. So I don't really understand it, and it's for me baffling on two fronts. Firstly, because of the fact that, from a tactical point of view, from a profile point of view, you have this midfielder against a South American side, against a Brazilian player against a Brazilian side who maybe would understand the situation, the environment, and what a time to give him a chance in the first team, to give a different look, to give a physicality, to give an athleticism to your midfield against a team who was very intense from the off. That's one part of it. The second part of it is just it creates a conversation when there doesn't need to be a conversation. Because if we believe, and I still believe, and I'm maybe again copium from my point and being naive, I think Andrey Santos is part of Chelsea's plans. However, when he doesn't feature in the first two games, what do you think the conversation is going to be? The conversation is going to be, where is he? Why isn't he playing? Why are you putting right backs in central midfield instead of playing him? And are we now leading to a conversation about his future that is only going to heat up? And I guess if you're Andrey Santos, you start looking at it and going, well, do I have a future? Why isn't my coach giving me a chance when, you know, I'm playing week in, week out at Strasbourg, you know, being one of Europe's most exciting young midfielders? And already I'm watching, you know, a right back in Reece James play there. I'm watching Malo Gusto instead of Reece James play there, and other players in front of me getting minutes already. So again, this is not to say this guaranteed, now it's destiny, you know, Andrey Santos is going to be sold. I can't, you know, say that right here. There's nothing to suggest he's going to be sold. But it also just kind of goes against what I kind of hoped this tournament would be, of looking at a fresh Chelsea, a Chelsea with an injection of new faces that could give us a look at what next season is going to look like. I know they're taking this very seriously, but if the fatigue and the mental tiredness as well, the strain on these players, which I can understand and appreciate, is there against teams like Flamengo, who are already in their season, at a very different stage of their kind of cycle yearly compared to Chelsea. why as a coach aren't you looking at those new players? I find that a little bit strange as well. I understand there's the risk that you're not playing your tried and trusted players in a tournament that the club are clearly taking seriously. However, I just those are two things that are, and a couple of things really, that I just find a little bit puzzling. Am I going to sit here and say, oh, it's all, devastating, it's all the end of the world? No, I'm sure some people will be, but it is a mess. And listen, I think Chelsea's level of performance is obviously going to need to be a lot better if they want to progress much further in this tournament. But I have to say, if Chelsea players get a rest sooner rather than later, am I going to be moaning about it? No. And that is a weird position to be in, but I think that's the current state of the football calendar. However, if I'm looking at Chelsea from a critical point of view of wanting to progress on the pitch, I think those are a couple of things that I just find a bit bizarre. So, yeah, Chelsea need to be a lot better if they want to get through to the knockout stages. Those are my thoughts. Please leave me yours in the comments below. We'll be back again tomorrow to start talking about transfers again, because I'm sure they will also crop up along with what's happening in this game, and whether Chelsea sporting directors have the capability to address some of the concerns that I'm sure many of you will have watching tonight's game. Please like, subscribe, follow the pod, all that good stuff, and I'll see you again very, very soon. All the best.